Spain crowned him in gold. But behind the robe was a body so deformed, even his doctors couldn't look him in the eye. His penis was twisted, his testicles grotesquely swollen. Every morning he forced his ministers to inspect it, to prove he was still a man. But that was only the beginning. His wives, prisoners in their own beds. His court, a theater of flattery, lies, and silent horror. And the country he ruled, dragged into darkness by one man's fear of not being enough. When he finally died, Spain buried his secrets with his body. But the truth refused to stay buried. This is the story of the most grotesque king Spain ever produced, a tyrant shaped by disease, and remembered in shame. Spain crowned him in gold. But behind the robe was a body so deformed, even his doctors couldn't look him in the eye. His penis was twisted, his testicles grotesquely swollen. Every morning he forced his ministers to inspect it, to prove he was still a man. But that was only the beginning. His wives, prisoners in their own beds. His court, a theater of flattery, lies, and silent horror. And the country he ruled, dragged into darkness by one man's fear of not being enough. When he finally died, Spain buried his secrets with his body. But the truth refused to stay buried. From the moment he was born in 1784, Ferdinand VII was never meant to rule, not because he lacked a crown, but because he lacked what mattered most in his bloodline: strength. His birth was a quiet panic in a palace built on incest. For generations, Spain's royal Bourbons had married their cousins, sisters, and nieces in the name of purity. What they created wasn't a divine ruler, but a genetic disaster. Ferdinand's legs were soft and twisted, his breathing faint, his skin sickly pale. And worst of all, his genitals were visibly deformed. What should have been private shame became a royal crisis. Doctors whispered it in Latin: hypospadias, his urethra opened beneath the shaft. They added another word, hydrocele, his scrotum filled with fluid, bulging grotesquely like a tumor. They bound the royal infant in silk wrappings. They told the court he was simply delicate. But behind closed doors the fear was real. Could this boy even produce an heir? Because a Spanish king had only one sacred task: to father a strong, healthy son. And Ferdinand was already a broken version of a man. As he grew, so did the paranoia. He refused mirrors. He bathed alone in total silence. He forbade court artists from painting him below the waist. Servants were punished for even glancing at him wrong. One was flogged for whispering about the king's curse. Another was sent to the dungeons for asking whether the crown prince had begun puberty. But it wasn't until his teenage years that his obsession with manhood turned into ritual. Each morning, trusted doctors, and sometimes ministers, were brought into his private chambers. They would bow, kneel, and lift the royal robes. To inspect, to confirm, to lie. Because for Ferdinand, the greatest threat to his reign was not France, not revolution, not God. It was the fear that his own body had betrayed the crown. Ferdinand's rise to the throne wasn't marked by triumph. It was surrounded by unease. He came to power in 1808, after years of scheming, betrayals, and public unrest. Spain, already spiraling toward war and collapse, placed its hopes in him. They called him El Deseado, the desired one. But what Spain desired, and what they got, were worlds apart. At court, the new king was stiff, awkward, and paranoid. He rarely spoke in public. When he did, his words were stilted, as if rehearsed in secret for weeks. His eyes darted constantly, scanning faces for mockery. But beneath the fear was an obsession: prove his manhood. That meant one thing: marriage. His first bride was Maria Antonia of Naples, a princess known for her elegance and strength of will. At age 17, she married Ferdinand in a ceremony soaked in splendor. But what happened behind the palace doors was anything but royal. The wedding night was supposed to seal the alliance, to confirm that Spain's future was secure. But Maria Antonia would later confide, in code through private letters, that what she experienced was the opposite of union. Witnesses near the royal bedchamber heard sobbing, then shouting, then silence. Ferdinand had tried to consummate the marriage, but his deformities made it nearly impossible. He was furious, Maria Antonia terrified. And the next morning, Ferdinand did what he always did when threatened. He blamed her. He accused his bride of insulting the crown, claimed she had humiliated him, and in front of stunned courtiers he struck her. Then ordered her confined to her quarters for undermining royal authority. What followed was a marriage filled with cold glances, locked doors, and whispered rumors. Maria Antonia grew pale, reclusive, sick. Some believed she suffered from tuberculosis. Others whispered the king was poisoning her, slowly, methodically, for daring to see him as he truly was. 2 years later she was dead. 19 years old. No children. No heir. The official report said, natural causes. But the palace knew better. And Spain felt it. Something was wrong with the king. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Ferdinand wasn't just broken. He was growing more powerful. And more afraid. A dangerous mix. Because a man who hates himself will destroy anyone who sees what he cannot bear to face. After Maria Antonia's death, Spain was restless. No heir. No stability. No clarity on what truly happened behind palace walls. But Ferdinand had a solution. Try again. His next wife was Isabel de Braganza, young, naive, and handpicked by royal advisors who hoped she might cure the king. She was beautiful, obedient, and, more importantly, from a powerful Portuguese family. The pressure on her was immediate: bear a son, secure the dynasty, silence the rumors. But Ferdinand's body hadn't changed. His deformity still made sex a painful, humiliating process, and his obsession with performance had only grown worse. The morning inspections continued. He recorded every successful arousal in a private journal, written in code. Some days he celebrated with gifts to the church. Other days, when nothing happened, he locked himself in his chambers and smashed furniture in silence. He blamed Isabel. She does not arouse the throne, he once reportedly told his doctor. But the court had had enough. The pressure to produce an heir reached a boiling point. And so a plan was devised. A dark, quiet, mechanical solution. Ferdinand would be artificially inseminated. It was not modern science. It was crude, painful, experimental. Doctors used syringes fashioned from silver and glass. Servants were forbidden from speaking. The entire event was treated like a sacred ritual of national survival. Isabel conceived. She was congratulated publicly. Privately she wept. Because the pregnancy did not bring relief. It brought surveillance. Guards outside her chambers. Maids handpicked by the king's spies. Every meal tasted. Every visitor logged. And as her belly grew, so did Ferdinand's paranoia. He accused Isabel of plotting against him. Of carrying a child that might not be his. He demanded more inspections, not just of himself but of her. Midwives were threatened. Servants beaten. One was thrown from the palace steps for laughing near the queen's door. Ferdinand began referring to the unborn child as my hostage. Not his heir. Not his legacy. Just another tool to hold power. But the baby never came. In her final months, Isabel grew violently ill. Her skin turned pale. Her appetite vanished. Doctors pleaded to intervene. Ferdinand refused. She died in childbirth, the baby stillborn. The court wore black. The streets were silent. And Ferdinand? He returned to his journal. And under the date of her death he wrote just one word: failure. By now, Ferdinand had buried 2 wives. One died of sickness, the other in childbirth. Both failed to give him what he wanted most: a healthy male heir. But what he truly wanted was not just a child. It was proof that he was still a man. That the bloodline could still run through his broken body. In 1829, the palace introduced Maria Cristina, his 4th wife. She was just 23. He was 45. And worse, she was his own niece. Another royal union soaked in incest. Another body meant to serve the dynasty. Another girl trapped in a palace where love was replaced by fear. Maria Cristina was told she must save Spain. But all she saved was the appearance of control. Ferdinand could barely walk now. His body was swollen, decaying, bent by infection. He'd scream from bed at night. He rarely left his chambers. And still, every morning the ministers came. To kneel. To lift the robe. To tell him he was still whole. Maria Cristina was not touched in the traditional sense. She was inseminated, quietly, mechanically. No ceremony. No privacy. No warmth. Just clinical ritual, performed by palace physicians, surrounded by silence. When she finally conceived, the court erupted in relief. A miracle. A royal resurrection. But the king didn't rejoice. He doubled his guards. He doubled the inspections. He whispered to advisors, "Make sure it's mine." Spain waited. The people hoped for a prince. But when the child was born, it was a girl. Isabel. Ferdinand flew into rage. He accused Cristina of witchcraft. Of seduction. Of intentionally misforming the heir. And yet he could not undo it. The law said the crown must pass to a male. But Ferdinand was out of time. His body was collapsing, his mind unraveling. And so, in one final act of desperation, he rewrote the law, allowing a daughter to inherit the throne. It was scandalous, unheard of, but necessary, because he had no sons, no legacy, no future, just a broken body, a frightened child, and a nation clinging to the shadow of a crown. And while Spain debated politics, and nobles whispered of civil war, no one dared speak the real truth, that the monarchy had already died. It just hadn't been buried yet. By the early 1830s, Ferdinand VII was no longer a king. He was a rotting relic, swollen, silent, a man whose throne was still intact, but whose body had become a palace of decay. He barely left his bed. His legs were purple and crusted with ulcers. His skin flaked like peeling paint. And his groin, the obsession of his life, had become a source of infection and agony. Surgeons were summoned daily, not to heal him, but to drain the fluid from his groin and thighs. The odor was unbearable. The servants rotated every 2 hours, not for rest but to keep them from vomiting. And yet, even now, the inspections continued. He still made his doctors lift the robe. Still demanded they confirm that everything was still in place. Some bowed. Others looked away. No one dared tell him the truth, that the body beneath the crown was already dead. At court, no one spoke above a whisper. The ministers avoided eye contact. Even Maria Cristina, his wife, stayed silent. She no longer shared a bed with him, only a hallway. Ferdinand became convinced that the palace was full of traitors. He ordered his food to be tasted by 3 different servants. He had his daughter's cradle inspected for poisons. He scribbled names on parchment and passed them to guards at night. Watch this one. Kill that one if I die. No one knew what was real anymore. And then, one morning, the king didn't speak. He lay in bed, breathing, staring, but silent. For 3 days. The court waited. A priest came. Then a second. Then a royal embalmer, sent in advance. He finally spoke on the 4th day. Not to Christina. Not to his ministers. But to the doctor standing at the foot of his bed. Wrap it before they come. No one must see. He was talking about his genitals. The same thing he had feared since childhood. The thing he had built his kingdom around. The lie he could never let die with him. And so, when he finally took his last breath, his doctors followed orders. They cleaned him, wrapped the lower body in silk and oils, and sealed the coffin before dawn. The funeral was public, grand, glorious. But what lay inside that box was not a king. It was a man who had spent his life trying to hide the one truth he could never escape, that he had been crowned not out of greatness, but out of desperation. Ferdinand VII was buried with ceremony, velvet banners, Latin prayers, and mourning nobles dressed in black. Spain pretended it was grieving a great king. But behind the scenes, the palace was panicking, not because the king was dead, but because what he left behind could not be hidden forever. There were whispers, among servants, among clergy, even among the doctors who embalmed him in the final hours. Something was wrong with the body. One account, never officially acknowledged, came from a royal attendant who claimed to have glimpsed the corpse before it was dressed. The lower flesh was blackened, misshapen. The scrotum grotesquely enlarged. The legs green. The skin broke like paper when touched. We were told to look away. But the doctors didn't look away. They wrapped his groin in silk and scented oils, more elaborate than any king before him. Then they sealed the coffin early, before the full embalming was complete. Why? Because Spain couldn't afford the scandal. Rumors had already spread across Europe that Ferdinand was sexless or cursed or deformed beyond comprehension. If the truth emerged now, his heir, the infant daughter Isabel, would inherit more than a crown. She'd inherit a legacy of madness. So the coffin stayed shut, the record sealed, and the official line was repeated. His Majesty passed in peace with full dignity. But peace would not last. Years later, as civil war raged over who should truly inherit the Spanish throne, a secret exhumation took place. Details remain scarce. But one note, buried in a physician's archive, included a single line. The king's body had been altered, tampered with, the lower parts, concealed, modified, or mutilated. No one knows for certain. Because soon after, that physician was dismissed from court. His notes confiscated. His name erased from official records. What we know is this: the body of Ferdinand VII was buried quickly. It was never publicly displayed. The embalming was rushed. The cause of death vague. and the burial site guarded for decades, even from the royal family. And perhaps that's the final irony. The king who ruled through terror, who demanded inspections every day of his life, who destroyed wives and rewrote laws out of fear, was buried under a crown he never truly wore. Not the one on his head, but the one he tried his whole life to forge between his legs. Ferdinand VII was dead. But his sickness, his fear, his shame, his madness, wasn't buried with him. It infected the court. It haunted the crown. And it echoed in whispers through Spain's broken empire. His daughter, Isabel II, was placed on the throne as a child. But her rule was fragile from the start. The nobles doubted her. The generals mocked her. And Spain itself split in two, between those who supported her and those who believed a girl could never inherit from a perverted king. Civil war erupted. The Carlist Wars, fueled not just by politics, but by distrust in the bloodline itself. Some whispered that Isabel wasn't even his child, that she was planted, fabricated. Others claimed that Ferdinand had left behind a secret son, hidden to avoid scandal. But no such son ever appeared. Instead, what spread was a legend. A dark, grotesque myth passed between doctors and priests, that Ferdinand's body had been preserved, and his genitals, his obsession in life, had been cut off and kept in a jar, sealed in alcohol, hidden in the Vatican archives. No official record confirms it. But the rumor was too poetic to die. A king who ruled through fear of impotence, reduced in death to a floating specimen, locked away in silence. In medical circles, his name became a case study. Ferdinand syndrome, some whispered, a label for men whose sexual insecurity turned violent, whose power masked a bottomless fear of being exposed. He was no longer just a king. He was a warning. And in literature the echoes began. Spanish novels, plays, even quiet passages in philosophy texts. A recurring figure, a limping monarch, obsessed with heirs, haunted by the silence of his own body. Ferdinand's legacy didn't live in monuments. His name was rarely honored. No grand statue stands in Madrid. No holiday bears his name. But his shadow remained. In how Spain viewed power. In how it taught its kings to fear weakness. In how it turned the human body into a battlefield for legacy, masculinity, and shame. Because Ferdinand VII wasn't just a ruler. He was a wound in the royal bloodline. One that could not be healed. Only hidden. He left behind no legacy. No triumph. No pride. Just a girl queen fighting for her throne. A country divided. And a name whispered only in disgust. Ferdinand VII. The man who ruled with fear. Because he feared himself. His reign wasn't marked by great wars or great reforms. It was marked by inspection tables, secret journals, and locked bedchambers. By bruised queens. By mutilated trust. By a palace that became a prison. He wore the crown of Spain, but in his mind, it was never truly his. Because he knew. He always knew. That beneath the robes, the titles, the rituals, he was incomplete. That his body had betrayed him before he could ever betray a soul. And that his people, if they ever truly saw him, would tear down the throne themselves. So he silenced them, buried them, beat them into obedience. He ruled like a man trying to erase his reflection, punishing anyone who dared to see what he couldn't bear to face in the mirror. His obsession with manhood wasn't vanity. It was a symptom of centuries of inbreeding, of a culture that tied masculinity to dynasty, of a court that measured worth in heirs, not humanity. And in the end, that obsession consumed him. It twisted his mind. It wrecked his marriages. It left his people in ruin. And it turned a nation's hope into rotting flesh in a sealed coffin. Spain never built a statue for him. Not because he failed, but because he revealed too much. He was a mirror, held up to power. And what Spain saw in that mirror, it couldn't unsee. A throne built on lies. A lineage rotted from within. And a king who proved that the most terrifying monsters in history are not the ones born with deformity, but the ones who believe power can hide it.